Hello. Tashdele everyone. Hello and welcome to the 15th session of our virtual weekly teachings by Geshe Lhakdor. And first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. So for some of us, it might be just the beginning of the new year. So how wonderful, right? And we have Geshe Lai here to again lead us through the path and teach us and share his insights with us. How wonderful, really. I would only say double the joy. Thank you so much, Geshe Lai, for being here and blessing us with your presence yet again. We are truly very grateful for your sharing of your insights and teachings with us. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today, despite this being a joyous occasion and you might have your own plans, but you came here, you took this opportunity. I'm very happy for you. And I'm very happy that we're all here. With this, let's just begin this new year. Geshe Lai, thank you.
Happy New Year. I recall once with His Holiness at the Varanasi ghat of river Ganga on a boat, and the people were celebrating the coming of new millennium. Then His Holiness on that occasion said few words where he said, there's nothing to be so excited with the so-called new millennium, because tonight if you put your head on the pillow and sleep, then next morning you will get up at the same person, no change at all through the effect of the new millennium. So, so if new millennium has not so much power, then just one new year may not have that much power. It is a worldly conventional way of giving different designations and then celebrating joy. There's nothing wrong with that. This is okay, so I'm greeting you. But the fact is that every day is a new day. And in fact, every day is a new year also. Every day is a new month also. So seen from that perspective, you know, we can enjoy every day, not in a senseless way, because the so-called enjoyment that we do during occasions like New Year is in many cases, from a strict religious point of view, may not have much meaning, but it's okay, you know, to enjoy so long as you do not harm anybody. So that's fun. It's good to have fun and to be happy. So that's also part of making one's life smooth and happy. So that's important. And then those of you who are attending the talk today indicates that you practice the perseverance or effort in Buddhism. In Buddhism, the effort, you know, or perseverance means enjoying spiritual practices. So it is not that you can enjoy only when there is a cracker, you know, exploding or singing and dancing, but for many true spiritual practitioners, the most delightful occasion and happy occasion is to be with oneself, to remain in solitude, and then explore the intricacies of one's own mind. And deep down, you can find that fathomless happiness and joy, which nobody can share just by the hullabulla or, singing and dancing and things like that, which is really, really ephemeral and temporary. So as I said, I'm nothing wrong with this thing. Nobody can, I also need that kind of occasion, so we are all ordinary people. So there's nothing wrong with that. But all I'm saying is that at the end of the day, to really be able to enjoy and be happy, one is to explore the inner resources and live in with those inner resources, which will be the unfailing guide and friend for all times of upheaval and ups and downs in one's life. That's very, very important. So therefore, the most important thing, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, is that, on such occasion like New Year, you make a commitment by saying that I will make some changes, bring about some positive transformations out of the many things that we can do, at least in one area or one category. I will improve, I will transform. That kind of commitment is, I think, very, very important. I think it is in this context, Guru Pema Sambhava said that people are saying time is changing, but he said it's not the time that's changing, it's human being that's changing. That does not mean to say the time is not changing, but the so-called dramatic effect that we are able to see is primarily through our human doing, not the time itself. Time itself, it's of course changing, it's fleeting, but it does not bring about any drastic transformation of good and bad and things like that. It is like a vacuum space where you can play your football or whatever, So we are the players. So the positive and negative effects that we see around are our own doing, the positive or negative changes of human behavior. So we need to recognize that. It's extremely, extremely important, especially starting from the new year, now that we have this wonderful introduction of suffering and the relevance of enjoying and happiness due to the precious teacher COVID-19. What we learned actually, of course, we experienced many unfortunate things, but if what we learned from COVID, hopefully, for many people, is really, really very good introduction to Dharma. In fact, should be profound Dharma. Because what ordinary teachers teach may sound good, but it may not affect you drastically. So in order to affect one's life and bring about positive transformation, it's important to really experience suffering, unfortunately. There's the only language people understand for real transformation. So which you will read in this interesting chapter, which we are going to read. So therefore, this chapter number 14, the title of this chapter is called How to Uproot Suffering and Meditate on the Equality of Mental Sinking and Mental Excitement. So there's the chapter, How to Uproot Suffering. We are all familiar with the so-called suffering, but in Buddhism, there is an in-depth understanding and teaching on suffering. And if you go to the original meaning of this word, suffering in Hindi or Sanskrit, which is called dukkha, and sukha, suffering is dukkha and happiness is sukha, sukh or dukh, as we say. So the word dukh is combination of, I think, two letters, dukkha. Similarly, sukha. So dukkha means, du means something rough, unpleasant, something not smooth, and kha means whole. So this is compared to a wheel. In the case of a carriage, in order to have the carriage run, the wheel of the carriage run smoothly, the axle, the hole where you have the axle, if that is smooth and the hole is good, then the wheel will move smoothly. So that is sukha. On the other hand, if the hole where you have the axle is, full of rust or, or too small or whatever, then the wheel will not be able to move. Even if it moves, it will be bumpy, right? So similar like that in our life, in order to have the wheel of life run smoothly, we need to develop these positive emotions, positive qualities. It's not just speaking from the point of view of religious practices, but in our day-to-day life, regular life, there are different types of emotions. The negative emotions really hamper our growth, destroy our peace and happiness. So this is something, the most crucial point that we need to understand. Then the positive emotions, they will help run the wheel of our life smoothly, bring harmony, stability, and peace. This you can examine yourself. Why this is so? This is so because it's the way things are. It's the law of nature. If you say why sugar is sweet, how are you going to explain that? It's the way things are. Why the flower of the rose is different than some other flowers? It is the way things are, right? So therefore, all we are talking in terms of Buddhist practice is to move in accordance with the law of nature. Whether you talk about compassion, talk about shunyata, talk about impermanence, we are talking nothing other than the law of nature. It is not by understanding the law of nature that we are suffering. So in a way, suffering unnecessarily. I call it unnecessarily because if you had known how things go, how things run, what are the sources of your long-term happiness and peace, then accordingly make a attempt towards that, we will be able to remove many of these unpleasant experiences and sufferings. So therefore, happiness is basically in our hand. The removal of suffering is also our choice, right? Nobody can really push you to suffer endlessly. Choice is ours, right? But unfortunately, as I said, we don't pay any attention to the workings of the mind, how an important role the mind plays in bringing happiness and suffering. We don't pay any attention to that. Some of us read a little bit, show a little bit interest for few days, then after that, no effect in our life, no practice, right? So it's very difficult to bring about any change. For the body, we eat tirelessly, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then in between Kit Kat, whatever, so many things we need, right? And the market is also flooding with all those eatable things, right? And in terms of the mental development, spiritual development, or emotional hygiene, as His Holiness says, there's nothing much available in the market, right? So you need to cultivate it. The fact that you are unable to see the mind, therefore you ignore it, is a very stupid thing, right? And especially for us, the grown-up people, we know the influential kind of role played by the mind. So the secret to happiness lies there in the mind itself. And here, nobody can help you unless you do it. And it's a very interesting thing. If you start doing it and gradually, if you get habituated and make a strong decision, then like Milarepa, nobody can harm such a person. And there is no fear at all. Not worried at all about what's happening with my relative, brother, sister, this, that, what is the latest news, all those doesn't make any sense, right? And therefore, he always prayed that if I am able to die in my dry cave, nobody crying after me, then the yogi's wish is fulfilled. And if there is no human footprints at the entrance of my cave and I die peacefully, then the yogi's wish is fulfilled, you see? For us, we expect that even when we are dying, we are surrounded by our relatives and friends, although they may not be able to help anything. Instead, they might distract your attention, right? So anyway, that is the ordinary way of living things. So anyway, what I'm saying is, in accordance with this particular chapter that we are reading, we are talking about how to uproot suffering. So we need to understand suffering. Suffering basically means unpleasant, unhappy feelings, experiences. And in Buddhism, we talk about three types of suffering: obvious suffering, like headache, stomach ache, and so forth, obvious, which we can understand and which animals can also understand. So you don't want that. That's why we have all these hospitals and medicines and things like that. Clear that you don't want that. Then there is a second level of, so this level of suffering we understand a little bit, but nothing great about that because animals also able to understand that. So there is a second level of suffering, which is called suffering of change, which is much more subtle. And at least we must make an attempt to understand that, even if we are unable to go to the third level of understanding, the third level of suffering. But the second level of suffering we should try to understand, which is called suffering of change. Like, for example, in the case of this pandemic, it's impermanent, it's going to change. They used in scientific language, they call it mutation, right? Now they are talking about this more dangerous mutation. But luckily, this dangerous mutation is able to transmit the illness much more than the previous one, but the fatality is not so dangerous, it's similar like the previous one. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, it will also change through vaccine, change through immunity, things like that. Things will change. Positive things will also change. Negative things will also change. Why do we have to understand this? We need to understand this because ordinarily, when we experience some happiness, we expect that this happiness should be there forever. That's why you cling to your relatives and friends and you grasp onto them, thinking these are sources of my friend, my relative, they are the source of my joy, my happiness. May they live forever, Then when they die, when they pass away, we are completely in shock because we were under this misconception that they are going to be with us forever, which of course is not. So right in the beginning, we should be ready. We should understand that anything can happen anytime. That understanding will help you to live more harmoniously with everybody. What is the point of, doing bad things to somebody who is going away? And it is more sensible to do good things to somebody who is going away through death or whatever, separation or whatever. It makes great sense, right? So therefore, you need to understand with the second level of suffering that things will change. Therefore, you should prepare your mind in such a way that you don't become a victim to these foreseeable or unforeseeable changes. The changes will come. And as and when the changes come, your mind should be able to accept that and adapt to that. Then nobody can harm you. So it's really like riding on the waves. A good swimmer is able to ride on the waves. However terrible the waves are, they know how to scale through those waves and they don't get drowned. So those of us who do not know how to swim properly, then we are easily get drowned, even in ordinary swimming pools. I used to get scared if the swimming pool's depth is more than 5 feet or 6 feet, like that. So it's the question of knowing how to ride the tide, how to go in accordance with the changes. So there's nothing to fear. Everything should be understood. And once you understand this, it looks like there's really nothing to fear at all. Because I think His Holiness was saying the other day that normally we are scared of death, but death itself means only, leaving the body behind. There is no death to the mind, right? So what you should really fear is not the death itself, but you should fear the negative, destructive things that you have done, which will produce negative consequences, inescapable negative consequences, which you will have to suffer. So fear that, not the death itself. Death itself, as I said, is like changing clothes. You leave the body behind, and in fact, you might take a new birth with a fresh body, fresh and young body, rather than this old ugly body. so which is actually good, right? So therefore, we're talking about how to put an end to the suffering. So at least you should understand this second level of suffering of change. So these two levels of suffering of suffering and suffering of change comes because there is something basically wrong. So there we talk about the conditioned suffering. Conditioned suffering means we experience all these sufferings because of the life itself. If we look at our life itself, the psychophysical aggregate that we have obtained is by nature fragile. What else you will expect rather than vulnerability and fragility and things like that? Because this body, as I think I mentioned earlier, this body, for example, is made of flesh and bones and things like that, very, very fragile. It's not made of iron or diamond or things like that. So it's by nature very fragile. And more than that, your mind, because of lack of knowledge of the reality, is extremely fragile. With slight bad news, you get completely discouraged. With slight good news, you just burst out and shout and almost get exploded. The mind itself is so fickle and so fragile. So therefore, it's important to especially prepare the mind in such a way that you don't, get drawn in this topsy-turvy emotional fluctuations, right? And then also you need to learn to live your life by yourself, not trying to adapt your life to the needs of the society. Unfortunately, today, if you look very carefully, like for example, celebrating the so-called New Year is another social invention. Somebody said this is New Year and everybody now saying New Year, New Year. As I said, there's nothing wrong celebrating it, but I'm giving you an example. If you don't know how to live your life, and if you keep on running according to the needs of the society, then imagine what kind of life you will have. You can never have a life of your own in that case. You will only dance at the whims of other people's dictates, the so-called social, customs and things like that. So therefore, at the end of the day, as I said, you need to find that long-lasting happiness by yourself. None of the social customs and dictates can bring you long-lasting peace and happiness unless you do it. Just like your food and the drinks, unless you eat, unless you drink, even if people feed you as they do when people are doing hunger strike, it will not be very pleasant, you see. You cannot depend on that for a long, long time. So just as you need to work hard, you need to take care of your body by taking food and drinks and so forth, you need to feed your spiritual hunger. You need to feed the mind, which we are not doing. So many of these countless unfortunate things that we are seeing in the society is a clear indication of uncontrolled mind. Right? So therefore, if you don't want all these sufferings, then you need to purify your mind, remove negative emotions in such a way so that you don't have to be born in this cycle of existence with the same fragile psychophysical aggregate. So that is a long-term solution. Right? And for short-term solution, even just changing your attitude a little bit, changing your perspective a little bit, you can reduce many of these unpleasant experiences. That's the short-term solution. But for long-term solution, you need to, as the text, it says, how to uproot the suffering. So the root of suffering is, as we have already discussed, ignorance, which is misconception of reality. Reality is that everything is interconnected, interdependent, impermanent, fragile, but we perceive completely in the wrong way. We perceive things as permanent, everlasting, therefore we think that even if you are, as I normally say, that even if you are an old man of 90 years old, still he will say, if you ask that old man saying that, are you going to die today or soon? He will say, yes, I'm going to die soon. Today, are you going to die today? Then he might say, today, maybe not. That's called grasping of permanence. And the today, so-called today, continues, thinking that I'll not die today, I'll not die today, I'll not die today. So therefore, Tsongkhapa in his great stages of the path, Lamrim Chenmo says, everybody has this little bit of understanding that one day I will die, but the problem is everybody thinks today I will not die. There's the problem. There's the problem. So therefore, the great meditators, teachers, they practice death and impermanence every day, not to make their life miserable or discourage themselves, but to really instigate them towards spiritual practices. And that is why Buddha taught this impermanence and death as the first topic of his teaching when he turned the wheel of the doctrine or when he started teaching. So therefore, the root is ignorance, misconception of reality, not just ignorance, but not mere ignorance, but misconception of reality. Now, when you meditate to develop that wisdom or understanding the reality as it is, then there are a lot of interventions, a lot of obstructions. And two prominent obstructions are mental sinking and mental excitement. So therefore, he's, in this text, he's talking about how to remove mental sinking and mental excitement. Even in our ordinary life, if your excitement means you get to, as I already mentioned, you get very excited for small achievements and small happinesses, then you won't remember doing any spiritual practice. So there is one extreme. Then on another extreme with slight, unpleasant things or unhappiness things, that you experience, you get completely deflated, discouraged. Either you're inflated, just like a balloon ready to burst out, or completely deflated. Gubere mein hawa nahi bolta hai na, completely deflated, right? So therefore, you need to avoid these two extremes. The easiest language. This text also starts with a very beautiful discussion. We don't have time to, go into all the details. But right in the beginning of this chapter, when they were, Atisha and Dumtumba, they were discussing, then Atisha says, I'm talking here in Tibet, the stupid, foolish Tibetans. So I need to speak in a language these ordinary, foolish Tibetans can understand. Easy, just by the word, they are able to understand, Then the discussion goes on, right? So therefore, what I'm saying is in that easy, understandable language, what we are saying when we talk about removing mental, dullness and mental excitement, we are basically saying that don't get too excited, don't get too discouraged in life. Maintain the balance. If you hear good news today, don't get too excited. Bad news is waiting. If you get bad news, you will feel sad, but don't get too discouraged because good news is coming. We have still not solved the problem of the COVID-19, but the good news, vaccine is coming. And not only the vaccine, but we know how to handle it much better than in the very beginning, you see. So there is a solution for everything, right? So therefore, don't get too excited, don't get too discouraged. And especially if you go into the field of meditation, then you need to thoroughly understand from where mental sinking comes, from mental excitement comes. Excitement comes by recalling something exciting that has happened in your life. For example, the beautiful picnic that you had last day or last week, or the very nice friend that you met 1 month before, whatever. You recall all those things. So you play the mental movie again. That's what we do. Oh, that was such a beautiful year. I met this friend. I went there and enjoyed this. We had such a beautiful lunch. This. We talk about this and replay the movie and then get very excited. So at that time of excitement, there's no the spiritual practice is irrelevant, right? So that's how excitement harms spiritual practice. Then on other occasions, you keep on thinking about the relatives that passed away last year, or the friend from whom you got separated, 2 weeks before, and the property that you lost in the bank, whatever, you keep on thinking about that. I mean, stupid as we are, because just by thinking about that person who died and feel sad, the person will not revive and come back to his or her life. So that's why the Buddhist teaching, in a more understandable language, all these Buddhist teachings are saying that do all those things that are meaningful, sensible, beneficial, and don't do all those things which are irrelevant, not useful, and stupid. And we keep on doing the same stupid things, keep on making the same stupid mistakes. That's why we die, come back into the samsara, we die, come back into the samsara, And Buddha did the sensible thing. He got enlightened, came out of the samsara. Right? So there's the difference. There's the difference. Right? So in a more easy to understand language, the source of suffering, without talking the big thing, which I've already done in a way, the source of suffering is negative deeds. Dikpa. Source of suffering is negative deeds, evil deeds. Right? What do you mean by evil deeds? There's so many evil deeds. Evil deeds are those deeds through which you directly or indirectly harm other sentient beings. Harming other sentient beings doesn't mean, using knife or things like that, but destroying environment, polluting water, and 100,000 other ways in a very inconsiderate way, without thinking, your behavior, how your behavior is influencing negatively in many areas, without thinking that if you just randomly pollute the water and pollute the air and things like that, it's all helpless. You are harming sentient beings, which is a negative deed, evil deed, which is evil deed. So positive deed doesn't mean that you confine yourself in a monastery or temple and chant the mantra. No, far from that. In fact, many of this confining oneself in the monasteries, temples, and chanting mantra may not even be a Buddhist practice, honestly speaking. So we need to understand the Buddha's teaching in a much, much more wider way. Let me give you an example. For example, I see people going around the temple, There's a habit somebody has started, then everybody starts going around that temple. And that is supposed to be doing Dharma practice. Right? Then suddenly in the path to circumambulation, if you find dog shits or any, unpleasant things lying there, nobody will remove that. Because cleaning that, removing that is not considered as a Dharma practice. So you can now see for yourself, what is this Dharma practice? I may be wrong, but at least from my perspective, if cleaning those things will be actually much more virtuous than just going around, reciting some mantra whose meaning you don't know, things like that. So therefore, Dharma practice is something that we can do everywhere, just by the way you look at other people, just by the way you talk to other people, just by the gesture you make towards other people. Through all this way, you can show your kindness and compassion and love and friendly. So these are all Dharma practice, right? So therefore, the source of all suffering is negative deeds. Literally translated, this Tibetan word dikpa for me is really like fearful deeds. Fearful deeds. That means if you do something, that harms other people, it's a fearful deed. And the other day I told you, if somebody does, something which harms other people, then normally that is considered as insanity, because nobody in his or her, sane mind will think about harming other people. And we have this insanity because of negative emotion. Negative emotion makes us insane. So therefore, if you really want to be a person, with sensibility, a sane human being, then you need to stop all these negative deeds. So to make a long story short, it's as in the text 37 Bodhisattva practices mentions that all these sufferings primarily arises from thinking about one's own happiness alone. And the highest state of Buddhahood enlightenment comes because of thinking about the well-being of others. And Shantideva elaborates this point by saying that there's no need for me to speak in length. You just compare yourself to the Buddha. You have been for countless lives practicing self-cherishing attitude. So where are you now? Where have you reached? Buddha has been practicing the mind cherishing the well-being of others, the bodhicitta, the altruistic, mind. Where is he now? He is able to help millions of people. And we are not able to help even oneself. Forget about helping millions of people. So that is the difference between these two practices. So therefore, for one's own happiness and for the happiness of other people, practice compassion, loving kindness, and bodhicitta. Right? And we try to remove the obstructive factors, the self-cherishing attitude. Now here, a question can be asked by saying that, now since you are saying that try to remove all kind of suffering, then in that case, why should I meditate on compassion? Because when I meditate on compassion, I get suffering. This question is asked because the very word, Hindi word, karuna, literally translated, the word karuna means stopping the bliss, means stopping happiness. Because when you show so much concern and observe the sufferings, immense sufferings of other people, you get this unpleasant feeling, right? So this is refuted by saying two things. One, you may be experiencing a little bit of unpleasantness, unpleasant feeling, but this one unpleasant feeling that you develop by developing compassion will be able to remove the sufferings of many other people. So this kind of experience of suffering has great meaning, even on a superficial understanding. It's a great meaning. And His Holiness beautifully explains this by saying that the kind of unpleasant feeling that we get when we develop compassion and concern for others is like the waves on the surface of an ocean. In an ocean, you see the waves a little bit turbulent, but that turbulence or that wave is just on the surface. Deep down, that ocean is calm and stable. So similarly, the kind of suffering that you get, unpleasant feeling that you get by developing compassion is something that you developed voluntarily, intentionally. So deep down, there is confidence. There is no hopelessness. There's no fear. Only on the surface, you get some kind of irritation. But ordinary suffering that you get due to negative emotions completely destroys your stability from the bottom. Right? So there's a big difference. There's a big difference. So therefore, Shantideva says, since you're able to destroy many sufferings just by developing one suffering, then those who possess compassion must cultivate this suffering to benefit oneself and others, meaning that one must cultivate that kind of compassion. You will find that in there's verse 104 in chapter 8, chapter on concentration. If you read that, it is there in Bodhisattva. Then another way to reduce suffering is we experience suffering due to many negative emotions, especially attachment. So therefore, as again mentioned in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, that all these sufferings that we experience are like sufferings that we experience in the dream by getting a dream where you get the dream of the death of your son. And it is because of this misperception of the this wrong attitude of seeing the illusions as true, you are suffering unnecessarily. So meaning that all these things that is happening in the conventional level is a kind of, in Hindi we call it Maya ka khel. It's a kind of illusion, you see. So when you see these illusions as true, independently true, objectively true, then you get suffering. They get suffering. So therefore, do not grasp the mistaken appearances as true. Okay? And then all these evil deeds that we do, which is the source of suffering, as we mentioned, the root of those evil deeds is also the grasping and seeing things as having inherent independent existence, and especially seeing oneself and what belongs to you, I, me, and mine, as we say, as having true independent existence. And it is because of this strong grasping of seeing oneself as having true existence that we are fond of always seeing oneself as higher and others as a lower. And in this text, he gives a beautiful explanation, for the sake of clear understanding. Domtamba asked this question when Atisha says this is because of self-grasping and arrogance and things like that. Then Domtamba asks him, the arrogance should be all right. The pride should be all right because that person has that quality, some quality to be arrogant. Then Atisha answers this by saying, yes, you have some quality, but you have very little quality. And people who have very little quality, they get puffed up, they get inflated. And gives the example of firefly. The firefly with its little light thinks that he is somebody and moves around showing their light. I mean, the firefly may not have that arrogance, but it looks like that. But it says anybody who has this firefly-like, quality will get arrogant and puffed up. But if you are somebody who is sun and moon, giving so much light, will never get puffed up. The Buddha never get puffed up. That's why we say little knowledge is dangerous. Little knowledge is dangerous, right? With the little knowledge you get puffed up and you pretend that you know everything that is there in the world. So that's why if you strike a conversation with somebody, normally you will find that you will not get much opportunity to speak because the other people will say that I know everything, let me speak. Right? I also have that habit, which is very not good. Yeah. So it's because of this grasping to oneself that you need everything. I want this, I want that, I need everything. I must be the superior one. I must be the more handsome one, the beautiful one. the others are ugly, low, filthy, whatever, And this kind of attitude comes even in the case of a practitioner, because your real practice is very little. And that's why you get puffed up. Now look at this fundamentalism and fanaticism that we see in all different religious traditions. Because those fanatics and fundamentalists are actually those people who hardly know anything about their religion. And with that little knowledge, and then the grasping that I belong to this religion belongs to me, so anything that belongs to me should be good. That's how we think. And that should be good because it belongs to me. We should see the world not as it is, but we should see the world as I see it. That's our attitude. In the Buddhist teaching, when we talk about emptiness, we always tell people that you should see the world as it is. But contrary to that, we want to see the world as I see it. I told you the story of how once we thought that the earth is the center of the universe because I live on the earth, right? Things like that. So therefore, but again, there are certain kind of, the word arrogance and pride may not be relevant, but through genuine spiritual practice, if you get a little bit of confidence, thinking, I know this, I can teach, that is kind of good kind of, even if you want to use the word pride, it's a positive pride, right? So then he asked the question, okay, if this kind of arrogance comes out, then what should we do? He says, you should, as and when the ugly head of the arrogance arises, you should just pummel it. You should just crash it, destroy it. And this is said repeatedly in this text. You should immediately, as and when any of these negative emotions raise their ugly head, immediately destroy them. You cannot live with these negative friends for a long time, because the more you spend time with them, the more they will get the power to destroy you, the more you will get addicted to it. And for doing that, you should remember the instructions of the teacher, including Buddha. If you are somebody who understands the instruction of Buddha, then even if you become very, very famous, very, very wealthy and things like that, for example, in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, which Tongme Sangbo, he says that even if you are very, very well known and famous, everybody bows down to you, right? And you have the wealth like the Sharvana and things like that, but still you will not get puffed up, you will not get arrogant, right? So therefore, the sources for many of these negative emotions and evil deeds is the unchained discursive thought, the unruly conceptions. Even in a short time, 100,000 conceptions, discursive thoughts arise. And we run after these discursive thoughts. So that's why in the higher tantric practices, in the Dzogchen practice, they talk about not chasing the object, but just observing and watching. But we chase the object. And there are so many, countless objects to be chased. So therefore, as and the conception, discursive thoughts arise, try to transform it into understanding suchness. In other words, watch your discursive thoughts and let it get dissipated, disappear. And it is just like the waves in the ocean arise and dissolves or disappears into the ocean itself. So many of these waves of discursive thoughts arises in your mind, but let them get settled. Just by watching, let them settle, and don't run after them, don't chase them. As Atisha cites from one sutra, where he says that these discursive thoughts are great ignorance, and it is these discursive thoughts that they throw you into the ocean of samsara. Contrary to that, if you remain in that meditative stabilization of non-conceptuality, then it is like meditating on the space, and none of the negative emotions will arise. Then Atisha, then Rumtamba again asked him the question, how can we do this? What is the secret? And Atisha answered this by saying that the secret is just like, if you know the technique, it's only knowing the technique. If you know the technique, even you can transform the ordinary, gold, change the ordinary iron into gold, as the alchemists do, because they know the technique. So similarly, if you know the technique, you can change it. Now, in order to do that, first you need to identify the enemy. That is the source of all these evil deeds, source of all negative emotions. And the enemy is none other than this discursive thought, especially the discursive thought of seeing things as having inherent independent existence. So destroy that and find out when this discursive thought arises. Where are they? What is its shape? What is its color? From where it came from, where it is disappearing. When you analyze in that way, the discursive thoughts will disappear. By seeking, when you don't find, it means the only thing is the suchness or emptiness, which will be found, not the discursive thoughts. And then Domdamba again asks a question by saying that, is there any other, object that must be eliminated, or there are any other parts than these, things like that? And he says, yes, there are many, but don't get distracted by so many parts. Just concentrate on one course of action, one course of practice, one course of path. Otherwise, it's trying to go in two paths, going to two different directions. You cannot go into two different, paths leading to different directions. So here in this case, focus and meditate on shunyata, and other practices like compassion and love should also be targeted towards enriching that practice, leading towards one destination, the final destination of Buddhahood. And so there is no second door to liberation. The only door to liberation and peace is the wisdom, understanding, emptiness. Then Domdaba again asks a question by saying, well, this all sounds very good, wonderful, but in our ordinary life, we get illness and sickness, and if he's alive today, he might say, now we have the COVID-19, so we are getting all these misfortunes, calamities. So when we confront all these unpleasant things, how should we deal with this? Atisha answers this by saying that there cannot be a better spiritual teacher than these sufferings. So that's what I was saying right in the beginning. Look at this answer. There cannot be a Geveshinye or spiritual teacher or Kalyan Mitra better than these unfortunate things. So suffering is one. Suffering is, as Shantideva says, suffering is introduction to happiness. Here in this text, it says suffering is the one that will sweep your negative deeds clean. And misfortunes are your spiritual teachers. So when these things come, don't get unhappy. Don't feel unhappy. Then Domdamba further insists is a better answer by saying, are you saying that it is better to suffer? Are you saying it is better to suffer? And then Atisha answers this by saying, you need to understand that all these sufferings, problems that we are experiencing are a product of always thinking that I should be happy, and working towards it. All this running in the modern world that we do, in the pursuit of so-called pleasure or happiness, whatever, it's because of all this, we need this, we need that, we need that. And as a result, we destroy the environment, pollute the water and air, and then the result is pandemic and things like that. Very absolutely clear. And that happiness also, pursuit of happiness is also not for everybody, but just for oneself. I need this, I want this. So therefore, from that point of view, oneself is the root of all these negative deeds. So therefore, you should discard this grasping to self, just like the dead body of your father. Your father may be very precious for you, but once he is dead, there's nothing else than, discard that body. So this, therefore, you should get rid of this grasping to self and cultivate this wish to benefit others. Just like a precious gem, wish-fulfilling gem, which is really difficult to find. Just as if you find this precious gem, which is very difficult to find, you will immediately, preserve it, keep it, put it in the bank and things like that. So similarly, hold this precious mind of bodhicitta and so forth. And then at the end of the day, whether it's you or other sentient being, none of us have that independent inherent existence, right? So meditate on that. So therefore he says, if you think about all these realities in this way, then your mind will gradually move towards spiritual practice. So therefore, in this context, the practice of renunciation is extremely, extremely important. Then the second point is not to get discouraged or mental sinking. Sometimes you use the word mental dullness or sinking, but also mental discouragement. If you get discouraged, you can never conquer problems and difficulties. Whatever be the situation, see it from a larger perspective. Don't get stuck just seeing one aspect of that suffering. See from a larger perspective. Every experience has many, many aspects. See from a larger perspective and don't get discouraged. And therefore, practice of renunciation, seeing the limitation of the samsara is also very important, because if you are able to see that limitation, then you will see the goodness and the efficacy of dharma practice. Because at the end of the day, you will find that spiritual dharma practice is only the source of your long-lasting peace and happiness, nothing else. We are unable to sincerely practice or remember dharma because, as I said earlier, we think in the samsara I'm fine, no problem, with these small lollipops and things like that, we are happy, So therefore, as Aryadeva in his 400 verses says, that if you are somebody who is happy with his own small room or small house, why should he think about moving to some other place? It's only when you have problems with your family members and problems with your neighbors and problems with your small house and things like that, then you will start thinking about moving to other place. So similarly, as and when you see the limitations and shortcomings of the samsara, then you will long for nirvana, long for long-lasting peace, liberation, and so forth. So for that, you need to develop that spirit of renunciation. Okay? And in order to seek that renunciation and achieve liberation, what is important is mental confidence. Don't get discouraged. The reason is there's no need to get discouraged because you have obtained this very precious human life. Even though this precious human life is fragile, but you can continue to obtain this precious human life if in this life you observe, the virtuous practice in general, especially the morality and the meditative stabilization, and so forth. And if you think about many of these wonderful practices that you can do in this precious human life, your mind will be filled with happiness and joy. There's no other animal or sentient being that has the capacity like human beings to be able to think about, great qualities like bodhicitta, compassion, loving kindness, and we are able to do that. So instill joy in your mind. And to do that, you need to have some kind of patience. Because even when you do spiritual practice, you will have to undergo some kind of problems. So that problem should be seen as an ornament, not like a burden. And in fact, practice of patience is said to be the causes for getting a good rebirth and good physical form and things like that. And finally, getting the major and minor signs of Buddha. And then you also need to understand that when it comes to avoiding or removing the mental sinking and mental excitement, you need to balance it. Because sometimes even by meditating on compassion and loving kindness, you might get discouraged. And you will remember the story of even Avalokiteshvara, the 11-headed Avalokiteshvara. He made a vow that he will deliver all sentient beings. And he actually goes and helps many sentient beings. The next day he goes, he'll find more or less the same amount of people suffering. He delivers them and again goes and sees the same amount of suffering, sentient beings. Then he said, I give up, impossible. And because he broke his promise, it is said his head split into 11 parts. Then on the top of the 11th-faced Avalokiteshvara, you have the head of Amitabha Buddha, Amitabha or Amitayus, I think. Or Amitabha Buddha, because the Amitabha Buddha said, my son, don't get discouraged, I'm there with you. Right? So therefore, it is possible to get discouraged. So at that point, you need to again see with your wisdom mind that even being able to help some sentient beings is a great thing, right? With your limited ordinary state, right? So therefore, sometimes some kind of discouragement might come when you practice loving kindness and compassion, then uplift the spirit of your mind. And sometimes you practice, equanimity, you might might contribute towards development of ignorance. Or when you meditate on, joy, you might get too excited. So you should be the best person to judge the limit where your mind is going, whether it's getting discouraged or getting excited in the practice of the 4 immeasurable qualities or in the practice of that object on which you are trying to meditate. Okay? Just like balancing the 4 elements in your body. All 4 elements that you have in your body are necessary. But if you let one element become much more powerful than the other, you'll get sick. So all the 4 elements in your body must be balanced. Similarly, your practice should also be balanced. Okay, I think we stop here. Maybe for some questions.
Thank you so much, Geshe. Now we'll get some questions. Anybody? Okay. Jackie, you can go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for the precious teaching on New Year's. I was wondering if you were talking, someone asked last week about imagining the Buddha when they're trying to meditate. Is there another way we could we use breathing or something else besides a visual thing to concentrate on when we're trying to begin that practice?
You can concentrate on anything. To start with, you can concentrate on a flower. You can concentrate on anything that your mind fancies.
Does it have to be something visual? Can it be like a thought?
In the beginning,
Okay.
in the beginning, But in the beginning, you can, you can take the help of your eye, seeing that object carefully.
Yeah.
Then gradually, when you do that one-pointed meditation, that one-pointed meditation is done by the mind, not by the eye.
Yeah.
So therefore, the object of meditation is not any object outside, but it is the mental image that you have in your mind.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that practice is that if you're able to do that, for example, if the mental image is the image of the Buddha, then wherever you go, you have Buddha with you.
Yeah.
So your body becomes a temple. And the advantage of meditating on a Buddha is because it's not like ordinary object. On the one hand, you are able to achieve that one-pointed concentration. On the other hand, you are also able to remember the Buddha. So there are added, advantages. If you meditate on a flower,
Yeah.
you might achieve concentration, but other than that, there's no other added advantage.
Thank you. Is it possible for me to ask another question?
Yes, please go ahead, Jackie.
Thank you. So could you expand on what you meant today about watching your mind, the Dzogchen and the thought of watching the discursive thoughts coming and going and where they're going and coming and disappearing and how that helps?
Yeah. Yeah, for example, if you look at the nature of the mind, if you try to find out from where the mind came from, or where the mind is going, and where the mind is abiding, if you look at that, you will only find that the mere clarity of the mind and nothing else. So that is basically becoming closer to the ultimate nature of the mind, understanding the ultimate nature of the mind. Ordinarily, we think that the mind is something solid coming from somewhere and then stays somewhere and then goes somewhere, right? So that's why we use the word stream of consciousness. It's like a stream, So the same explanation that the Buddha did, to one of his students, saying that before you get teaching from me, you go to the river and wash and come back. We discuss about this,
Yeah.
and then the Buddha asked him, "Did you wash in the same river?" He said, "Yes, I washed in the same river many times." Then he said, "No, no, 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 you did not wash. You will never be able to wash in the same river again and again." So like that, the mind is not something that is concrete and solid and coming from somewhere, staying and then going. It's not like that. It's just a continuity.
Is this what they call Mahamudra?
I think similar explanation is found in Mahamudra also.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Dinara. Dinara, please.
Tashiderek Geshe-la, my question is how we can use the disease on the positive way. For example, if I ill and I feel bad, I feel irritation sometimes, how in this moment I can think my negative karma is cleaning. Now how I can use the disease and illness for the cultivate the positive quality in my mind.
That is, dependent on the person. If you are a more realized person, then of course, just like Milarepa, then you can of course tolerate all these problems and diseases. It will not affect one's mind. But for ordinary people like us, it's not easy, especially if you get very, very severe illness. Your mind will be mainly focusing on that illness, you see. But then if you at least have that, yes, I'm sick, yes, I'm having this pain, but there may be a reason for this pain. That pain may be cured. It may be the purification of the past negative karma. It's not just me who is having this problem. There are hundreds and thousands of people who are suffering, and in many cases suffering much more than that. So it's a perspective. When you change this perspective, it really helps you reduce that pain and being able to tolerate it, you see. It's not only said in Buddhism, but also scientifically found that your perspective the way you see the problem and difficulty makes a huge change because of your mental perspective. So it can affect in a positive way. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe.
Gisela, someone, Elroy Fernandez is requesting for your recommendation on some places to study, and he's open to online courses. So if you can please recommend some places for Dharma studies, I believe. Is that so, Elroy?
Books to read.
Not really. Places to study, Geshe-la, some online courses, yeah.
Place to study, it depends whether you know Tibetan language or you want to study, what is your, language that you are able to understand. Because if you know Tibetan very well, then go to some bigger monasteries, it may be good. But if you are not so well versed in Tibetan, then go to a place where there is teaching, through a combination of, Tibetan and translation and things like that. Okay.
Okay.
I did not say library is the best place to come.
Yeah. Okay, Caroline, do you want to ask a question? You have to unmute. I just sent it.
Yeah, I did, right? I wanted to go back on the literal meaning of karuna when you say that karuna means kind of, I did not write exactly stopping happiness, maybe for this unpleasant feeling may keep to remove suffering. I wanted to ask if it's like the personal effort that we do in compassion or the pain that we get from people, seeing people suffering, or well, if you can come back on the literal meaning of.
So it means when you show genuine concern,
yeah,
you get affected a little bit, you see?
Yeah, sure.
So that's what I'm talking about. So,
Yeah, okay.
So momentarily, you will feel, a little bit unhappy. So that's like stopping the bliss or stopping happiness. But that is on a very surface level.
Yeah.
Because deep down you have this courage,
have
this wish to help others. So it will not jolt you in a big way.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Geshe-la, thank you so much. So it looks like this is it for the evening or the morning for some of you. And thank you so much, Geshe-la. It's been such a privilege, such a fortune for us that we could listen to you on such a beautiful day, although I don't know if you'd agree. But thank you so much, Geshe-la. It feels like we're blessed for the year. Yeah. And on behalf of everyone, I would like to offer prayers for your long life and healthy life, Geshe-la, most importantly. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Bye-bye. See you next time.
And also, as always, we'll remain open for some minutes if you would like to say anything or discuss. Bye, Lataji, I can see you wave. I have people on gallery view. So Happy New Year, everyone, those of you who are leaving. See you next week.
Okay, then, a wonderful, happy, not just a new year, but happy, safe times from all of us at the Foundation for Universal Responsibility. And we really look forward to connecting with you next Friday. And stay well, stay blessed. And, the time, after the session is really if any questions or something come up that you'd like to discuss as a group. But nothing today, and so we will be here same time, same day of the week next week. Good night, and thank you, Norzin and Saringla, and thank you everybody for standing by and staying on. Good night, and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.